Hello and welcome to another episode of the Webinar Hacker with me, Diego Laje. This time we discuss how to select key topics that you will sustain as you produce your webinar and you will continue into your post-event communication. We do this with Tim Ito. Tim is a seasoned marketing professional. He started out at Netscape in the early days of online marketing. He founded the Marketing Nice Guys agency and teaches digital marketing at Georgetown University. He knows exactly how to guide you in this process and how to make not only a good webinar, but also how to stay in touch with your key demographic and turn them into loyal customers. Let's go directly into the interview. Tim, it's great having you. Thank you very much. One of the first things that smacks you in the face whenever you're preparing a webinar is what to talk about. Which you do this a lot. Which topics? How do you find the right topics?
Right. So if you're, it's a good question, Diego. This is probably the hardest thing for a lot of companies in that they kind of just choose the topic they want, right? And that's typically something that they feel comfortable presenting on and other things like that. But I think what you really want to do is you really want to go back to who your audience is, right? And all marketing is a lot about understanding your core audience, what their needs, what their challenges are, and then what solution you have to basically help them face those challenges, right? So I think some of it is understanding, if you know what those pain points are, choose a pain point, right? So that's number one. And you do that through understanding your audience through surveys. It's from talking to your audience. A lot of your salespeople probably have great ideas because when they talk to customers, they hear all the pain points all the time. So I think some of this is really just kind of getting down and really understanding who your audiences are and what their challenges are, and then addressing some of the key ones, and then choosing topics that are going to resonate with those audiences. So,
yes. And what you're suggesting is like go out, receive an input, right? And process it, produce.
right.
And then once you produced, then there's another output from yourself, from you as a marketer, with a follow-up email, with continuing that contact to convert the webinar attendance. How do you tackle that?
So once you kind of choose a topic, right, the big piece is, now that somebody's attended or somebody registered, so they have a certain interest in that topic, right? So
Yeah.
I think as you understand that, well, then you can follow up with a much more personalized sales process, right? And so what we recommend is a couple things. You basically have the attendees, you've got people who registered, and you're probably going to get about 40% of the people who actually registered to actually attend. So you probably want to send a specific note to people who actually attended the webinar, right? And from a sales process, you're going to do a one-on-one outreach to maybe all the attendees, and maybe you have 100 some attendees, and maybe that's just a unique individual outreach, right? You can also run what we like to say is like a marketing email series parallel to that. So what you do is you take that list. Typically, if you do, the typical platform is Zoom. You can export a list, import it into your marketing automation system, and then set up a tag that says this individual attended, registered and attended, or this individual just registered. And then you can set an automated email series that goes to each of those groups, right? That's unique to kind of what they did. So it's based on their behavior. It's probably going to get a pretty good response rate. And it runs those kinds of automated sequences, basically run parallel to a sales follow-up that you do directly. And all they do is sort of in parallel to the sales process, they're just supporting and reinforcing the narrative and the brand that you want to put out there.
So I have a lot to unpack here.
Okay.
First, it's you have a lot of lots of people register. Sometimes it's more than 50% do not actually show up.
Right.
right? Do you talk to these people in a different way? Do you I mean, do you segment these audiences that don't show up in any way?
Yeah, I think what we like to recommend for the clients that we run webinars for is that there's a obviously if they registered but didn't attend, they may not be as engaged in the topic, or something happened, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
Generally we send them a separate note, right? And so it's a separate series that might go out to them, and you could do this through the sales process, or you could do this through the automated series I mentioned. But it's I'm sorry you didn't get to attend. Here's kind of what you missed. You don't have to do that for the attendees. So the email number one is slightly different, right? Email number two then follows up a little bit more about the company. Email number three is make sure you talk to your salesperson, right, that has reached out to you about our products and services. So I think
Mhm.
that's a little bit way of a different approach for those who actually attended. For those who actually attended, you don't really have to recap what you went over. It is much more than a series about like, hey, I saw that you were engaged in this topic because you attended this webinar, and thank you for attending, all those things. You can also do, I mean, one of the other things that's worth paying attention to during the webinar itself are those people who actually participated. So I think one thing that you can do is you can make note of who participated and who asked questions. And, that's worth probably a separate outreach as well, right? Where you can kind of then go in and say to that individual, hey, I noticed that you were really interested in this topic. I'd be happy to answer any specific questions for you. And maybe you reserve that just for a sales process alone, right? They may not need as much on the sort of the nurture marketing automation campaign, if that makes sense. Right.
So those people who actually had a strong engagement, questions,
Yeah,
participated, they'd be like the tier number one audience and
exactly.
most likely to convert.
Right.
Um, and if I'm getting you right, it's like put your energy on those guys. I mean,
Yeah, it's like any prospect, right? It's the equivalent on the B2C side would be people who put stuff in a cart, right? They're your best, they're probably going to be they're most engaged, they are asking questions, or they've done some action that sort of indicates they might be really interested in this, right? In other words, they're asking questions about the expertise that a company or service is providing in this webinar, right? And that's a good thing.
Tim, what do you do with people who were present but did not engage, right? Like the level B or
Right.
like the second tier prospects.
And again, this is not to discount the value of those prospects either, if that makes sense, right?
No,
I
they
think
showed up.
they showed up, right?
Yeah,
Look, showing up, I forgot who said it, but Woody Allen, I think, said showing up is 80% of life, right? And
yeah.
that is significant, right? So as you kind of do that other outreach, you have a sales process with those individuals. You can run that automated series as mentioned, but slightly different from the one that's for the people who just registered and didn't attend, right? You could still do that. I think you don't have to, though, go to the extent that you do for the people who actually engaged. In other words, you can just set that up run it as an automated series and try to get a few more people to talk to your salesperson, because ultimately that's what it's about.
And for like the people who registered but did not show up, the tier C that we were discussing a minute ago,
Right.
how long do you suggest we remain engaged with those prospects? What kind of contact? For, of course, the first one is it's a pity we didn't have you. We would have loved to
Right.
have you. This is what we spoke about. We can send videos, maybe. Let me know what you think about it. And
Right.
then what next?
I think, a lot is going to depend on the sales cycle for whatever product service you're selling. So
Yeah.
it's probably not an answer where you can just say, oh, after 5, 6 months, you just basically give up. I think what you always try to do with any prospect is you stay in front of them, right? And so one of the things that we often say to clients is the more aggressive you are from a marketing standpoint, the better you're going to do, because it does two things, right? One is that it basically keeps your brand in front of them,
Hmm.
and two, when they're ready, they know your brand and they equate it with this particular expertise that you have. So I think the idea that I think what happens to a lot of companies is they sort of may run a process and then they stop. And then they never hear from the customer never hears from them again, or the potential customer never hears from them again. And you end up, as a company, you're sort of not taking advantage of the fact that maybe it was 6 months later or 7 months later. And, we've seen customers that come in on webinars, they convert a year later.
Yeah.
Right. And it just happens to be when the timing is right for them. So there's no set answer in terms of, I think, how you engage them, but you have to stay engaged with them, if that makes sense.
Stay engaged. And in a way, I want to restart the conversation, because what happens next is that you will probably think of a new webinar, right? To keep producing content and keep engaging that audience.
Right.
Now, the problem is that you already spoke about many of the key, like, top pain points of your audience. What do you do next? What do you suggest we do next? We like come up with something really new, but we may be, missing the point or the main target, or we keep drilling on the same topic. We come up with a similar thing, and continue working that way. What do you think?
I think, sometimes, and again, each is going to depend on each company, right?
Yeah.
But what ultimately you have to figure out is, if you have different audience segments that you are trying to market to regardless, right? You can certainly run, or you certainly should run, different webinars for those different segments, right? So that's one. They may not all be part of that same segment. If you only have one segment and you only have one industry, one group, or one target, like, that is probably something that where you're going to have to be creative in terms of coming up with that next webinar, right? But
Yeah.
for a lot of companies, they have multiple segments, and they also cover multiple topics in their industry, right? So a lot of companies are like that, right? So if you just we work, for example, on behalf of a company that does climate finance, right? There
Yeah.
are multiple topics for them to attack, and they can attack them for asset managers. They can attack them for asset owners. They can do basically colleges and university endowments, right? So there's a lot of different slices to that they can create content on and webinars on, right? So I don't think that, for a typical company, and a typical B2B company that's, let's say, I don't know, $50 million and above, right? They probably have a diversified products and services area. And so I think when you kind of think about approaching that, there's probably lots of opportunity for them to do webinars on different things, different topics that may hit different segments, but may be a different topic for that same segment they ran the webinar earlier on.
And we are creating a series, right? We're discussing on how to continue engaging, probably going sideways, right? To engage another market segment, put your effort in this,
Right.
this other part of your business, or this other part of your audience. Now, the after event comes. What happens to those? You put a lot of effort. Companies put a lot of effort into
Sure.
producing a webinar,
Yeah.
all the visuals and the execs and the training, everything. What do you do with that? I mean, do you think it's right to get that slightly off target content, to redistribute that as an email, as a comm, or something, as
Oh,
an
yeah.
engagement with the segments that are not directly being engaged by that material?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things you can do after the event, right? So the thing that we recommend is that, like, once you have a webinar, that's a good piece of content.
Yeah.
Right? It's worth distributing that, putting it behind a form on your website, putting an email out about that to people who didn't attend, right? Because if you think about webinar attendance, right, of all the people that you put it out to, only a fraction, and really it's probably a small fraction of your total audience, or your total email, right, database, that are probably going to attend that. There's probably other people who would be willing to attend that. What you do with that then is, anytime somebody attends, you just basically tag that in your CRM or your marketing automation system, and you sort of say, oh, this person attended. And then if you notice that over time they attend a lot of these things, maybe they didn't attend it live, but they basically access the archive of it, right? those are all things that you can measure and document in a CRM, right? So if you can do that, then ultimately you can do something what we tend to do with clients, especially like in Salesforce and things like that, is we'll develop a lead score for them, which is, hey, this person's been really, and you can kind of take a look at who's been the most active and who has attended the most things and who has done the most activity on whether it's your website or whether it's your attending a webinar, maybe downloading a white paper, whatever it is that you provide, right? And then you can give that person a score, and that those people might be worth, and we've found that those people are often worth going after from a sales perspective with a one-on-one touch, right? So those are things that's where you can use all these systems in the webinar, the email, all these things, and you can roll it up into something in your CRM that provides a little bit of value for your sales team and little insight for your sales team that they can use to identify the better prospects.
Wow. And Tim, which tools do you have specific tools you really like, flavors that you really like? Can you give us an idea of what it is that works best, at least for you,
Sure.
in your experience,
You
which is
know, it's going to depend on the budget each company has, right? The biggest companies in the world as a CRM, they probably use Salesforce or HubSpot, right? Because those are the top, probably two of the top systems, right, in the world for this type of thing. The capabilities of those different systems are really good. Now, the problem with Salesforce is that it's just really a CRM, and you have to add a marketing automation system on top of it and connect it, and there's a lot of pain in the ass with that. I think if you look at like a complete system, you know, for especially from a B2B standpoint, you probably want to look at something like a HubSpot, which is sort of a self-contained. They do email marketing, but they also have a full service CRM that's got a sales capability side to it. Or you want to look at something if you don't have the kind of budget for HubSpot because it is expensive. You could probably look at something like an Active Campaign, which has similar features. It's just probably not as robust, but it's going to be a little bit more inexpensive. So you can set up all the automations you want. You can set up the triggers you want for each of the emails that go out and things like that. And yeah, so there's options for you as a B2B business to choose the right platform.
some of these tools allow for SMS communication.
Yes.
Some people, especially in the B2B space, don't really like SMS. What others love it, right? It's one
Right.
engagement, it's one more time, in the mind of the decision maker or the
Yeah.
prospect. What do you think?
The hard part about SMS is really making sure that your permissions are set up, because you have to go through a number of steps to make sure that you can send text messages, right?
Mhm.
The companies that do that have very robust terms and conditions, privacy policies, and all those other things. So I think as you kind of think through that piece, that's got to be something that you have to make sure that you basically beef up those two areas, in particular your terms and conditions, your privacy policy. We're talking to a company right now where we're helping them through this particular process. That said, I think there are opportunities on the B2B side. It's typically used much more heavily on the B2C side,
Yeah.
but there are opportunities on the B2B side, certainly, because, a lot of people, I don't know about you, but for me, certainly, I probably read a lot more of the text messages than I do the emails. And that is borne out by the data, right? That people read text messages a lot more. They open them, they see them. They may not react to all of them, but they look at all of them. And I think that's certainly an opportunity that a lot of B2B companies probably have not yet exploited. Right.
Tim, we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that, especially in the post-event communication
Right.
time or space, I want to make sure that we covered everything. That is there anything I may be missing here? Something you'd like to add?
I think sometimes the one thing that is useful for follow up on the B2B side, it's called account based marketing, right? And so one of the things to think about is if you have, depending on the product or service you offer, right? You can basically, if you're attracting a lot of people from one company, it might be
Mhm.
worth doing your follow-up for that company. So sometimes what account-based marketing is basically is you choose key accounts, right? So key companies where you really want to get the business. So you reach out to, maybe it's the CEO, the COO, the chief technology officer, also all the senior managers under that who might use the product or service that you're trying to put in front of them, right? And
Yeah.
you basically create an experience just for that company. And it's worth probably thinking about, if you only have like some companies that you really are trying to attract, is you can do different outreach for those different individuals, if that makes sense, right? So different outreach for the senior managers versus what you say to the CEO versus what you say to the COO, right? Because each of them is going to have different challenges or needs as far as this whole process goes. So I think that might be worth thinking about as you think about, like, especially a B2B process and what can be effective there.
On this one final thing, would you? Some companies, they work to to actually engage very large, for example, government contractors and so on. Does it make sense to tailor a whole webinar to a company or a prospect, or is it too much work for probably little or no return?
I mean, it really is going to depend on the size of the company and the number of different divisions that could potentially use
Hmm.
your product or service, right? So I can't really speak to it. If yes, if you are going to do like 100,000 person company and you can get 50 different employees to attend, I would say sure, it's probably going to be worth it, especially the right or the key employees. In other cases, it may not be the best idea, just because you may not be selling to all the different divisions of the company. You may be only selling to one division, and it's really going to matter. That's really going to be the gating factor, I would guess.
Great. Timito, thank you. Thanks a lot. Great having you. And thank you for your insights.
No, thanks for having me, Diego. So it was nice to talk to you.
Optimizing webinar topics and post event engagement. Choose topics that resonate by identifying audience pain points through surveys and sales feedback. Segment follow ups for better engagement by tailoring outreach for attendees, non attendees, and highly engaged participants. Leverage automation and CRM tools to use automated email sequences that nurture leads in parallel with direct sales follow ups. Maintain long term engagement by staying in front of prospects with consistent, value driven content. Thank you for being part of this part of hacking webinars here, trying to improve our skills to acquire better, high quality prospects that will lead to real good business. If you want to be part of this community, all you have to do is like, share, follow, comment, ask questions, because probably in the questions we will all get something that will enrich us. As usual, stay tuned for the next episode of the Webinar Hacker with me, Diego Laje. And until then, I say bye for now and thanks.